On today's Emerging Tech Horizons, the 2024 Vital Signs Report, the health of the defense industrial base and what it means for our national security.
One thing is essential: to accelerate decisions. You need innovation that fits the mission. We innovate from AI to zero trust. We integrate using open APIs that you control. We automate with smart solutions so warfighters know and act faster. Your mission, accelerated. Tomorrow's challenges, anticipated. Win faster with Booz Allen.
Hello and welcome to the Emerging Tech Horizons podcast. I'm Arun Serafin, Executive Director of NDIA's Emerging Technologies Institute. Today's episode, we're going to talk about NDIA's 2024 edition of the Vital Signs Report. I got the cover right here, which discuss the health of the defense industrial base. As the U.S. is shifting its focus towards great power competition, we're becoming more and more aware of the importance of the connection between our military forces and the defense industry that supplies them with all of the tools, the products, the systems, and the services they need to perform their important operational missions. It's become increasingly clear that the industrial base is under considerable stress and strain, and there's growing questions about whether it can actually support those operational missions that we envision in the future. The Vital Signs Report explores challenges facing the industrial base with the goal of creating a robust defense industry ecosystem that can support R&D of new technologies, prototyping and manufacturing of those technologies, and even deployment and maintenance of those systems for many years potentially in the field. To discuss this topic, we're honored to welcome my good friend Jen Stewart to the podcast. Jen is the Executive Vice President for Strategy and Policy here at NDIA, and she and her team focus on pressing issues affecting the defense industrial base. Before coming to NDIA, Jen had a long and distinguished career. She's well known in town. She's respected amongst people both in the Pentagon, on the Hill, and in industry. She's got this great bipartisan reputation. She was Chief of Staff to the Secretary of Defense and also former staff director of the House Armed Services Committee, where I actually got to work with her a fair bit. Jen, it's so great to have you with us here today. Please welcome Jen to the podcast along with me. So working with you both on the Hill and at NDIA, I know your incredible background, but I also know your style. You only permitted me to do about a half a sentence of introduction. So I'm going to put you a little bit on the spot and say, can you share a little bit more about your career path and how you came here to NDIA?
Well, Arun, thank you for having me. And it's a joy and a privilege to be on a podcast with someone I consider a personal friend and someone I admire as a professional colleague. So thank you. I'm happy to talk about my career journey a little bit because I hope it inspires new and emerging talent in being attracted to come and work in government and then also in industry. So I started on the Hill right after college. I moved out here without a job, worked my way up, spent 10 years in leadership working for two speakers on national security issues. When it was time to leave, I went over to the Pentagon.
So your first job on the Hill was?
I was a staff assistant.
Which meant you were?
I was opening the mail. And the first day on the job was the day anthrax was delivered to the Hill. So I worked one day and then I was out of a job for 7 weeks before they got Longworth cleaned up.
Wow.
So, there's no job in Washington that's too small. Answered the mail, answered the phones, arranged congressional tours. Pretty much did everything except make coffee. I felt like that was the one thing that I would not allow myself. So I never learned how to make coffee out of the coffee machine.
That's great. Sorry, go ahead.
No problem. So was privileged to work in leadership for 10 years, got to work with multiple committees in the House and the Senate. I think that's actually where we first met. And then I went over to the Joint Staff for about 18 months, which was quite an education for a civilian such as myself. Came back to the Hill and was staff director to Mac Thornberry when he was chairman of the Armed Services Committee. Got to work very closely with you. I'll never forget our last conference together, 5 months of slogging binders back and forth. And then I spent a year at the Pentagon serving as Chief of Staff to the Secretary of Defense. And when I left government, one of the things that was really important to me was nonlinear growth professionally. And I felt my career path had not exposed me to what I call the business side of our business. And so I feel very fortunate to be at NDIA. We talk about it all the time, but we truly represent companies across the country in every sector of all sizes, and learning the disconnects and the opportunities for government and industry to collaborate has been just a professional privilege and joy.
Well, that's great, and it was great to work with you, especially with in your time with Mr. Thornberry. Mr. Thornberry is now a member of my advisory board here at ETI, and he's been a great support for everything we do at ETI and at NDIA.
He's a national treasure.
He is.
He'd be very upset if he heard us talking about him, but he is a national treasure.
And there's so many stories that we can turn into podcasts. I'd love to do one on the life of a staff director, which is one of the most mysterious positions in Washington, but super important for driving legislation to a conclusion and navigating sometimes a pretty difficult and politically tough place.
So our mystery is our armor. So I don't know that we can peek behind the curtain.
Maybe that's a podcast after dark thing.
That's right.
But today we're going to talk about what's going on with Vital Signs. First, I want to let you talk about your team, the strategy and policy team at NDIA. What do they do? How do they work with NDIA members?
First of all, thank you for letting me brag about them. We have an exceptional team right now. We have a senior director for strategy and policy, Michael Seeds. He works on a lot of digital modernization issues, so cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, intellectual property, and data rights. Chris Sachs on our team, associate director. He's really our project manager, keeping me on track and actually getting the survey out the door, which I'll talk about in a minute. We have an exceptional associate, Riley, who put together all of the data analytics behind the survey. And I'll talk about this a little more, but she put together all the financial data, the facts and data that are showing how the defense industrial base is comparing to non-defense sectors across the country, and how it's driving their business behavior on some of the key areas that government and policymakers are paying attention to. And then we had some brilliant associates, including Bridget Sullivan, who's left us to go to government, who also worked it. And so every year we just want to keep taking it to the next level. But that powerhouse team is the driving force behind the report.
And the policy and strategy policy team works hand in hand with our team at ETI,
Yes.
and also hand in hand with the divisions and the chapters and the members of NDIA in things like reacting to legislation, in things like helping to inform the debate, discussion on regulatory policy. And I'm going to say for you, you have an open door to the NDIA members if they want to reach out.
You know, one of the things I truly love and respect about getting to work with you and your team is the close collaboration between S&P, the strategy and policy team, and ETI. There are times where you all are in the lead, particularly when it's a policy issue and where we're in supporting role. And then there are times where we're doing regulatory submissions where you need us all to take the lead. But I'm really proud of the close collaboration and communication. And even your team informed a lot of the survey questions and the writing that went into the 2024 report. And I'm hoping that that's an area where you can spend time and invest with us moving forward. The thing I love about NDIA is we have 27 divisions, which are our technical experts, who all contributed to the survey and to the drafting of the report and recommendations, 23 chapters around the country. And that's where we're really trying to get the grassroots perspective of what's going on in the defense industrial base and kind of get out what I call the self-referential Washington conversations.
So let's start to dig into here. Just to start and level set for everybody, what is Vital Signs?
Vital Signs is our flagship annual report on the health and resilience of the defense industrial base. I was very privileged. I actually inherited this project. It was started by my predecessor, who had the vision of, if the value proposition and the brand differentiation of NDIA is we are all across the country talking to companies in every sector and of every size, then what we see as the top priorities and challenges of the defense ecosystem, that is a powerful and truthful voice, and we need to present their concerns, their challenges, where they see opportunities to the American people. And so we have challenged ourselves of every year making this report more and more distilled down to the core issues that they care about.
And the product is then a physical report. We've got pages strewn across here, but it's available online.
Absolutely. URL is ndia.org/vital signs. You can see this report and all the previous reports in the series.
Okay, so let's talk about how you put together the report. I think you talked about engaging with the member companies and other people. How is the research conducted? What kind of data do you collect, and what are you looking for?
So there's a couple things we do. One, we have a proprietary survey that we're very proud of because of who contributes to it. This year we had a 6.5-fold increase in the number of respondents over last year. And the thing I love about it, Arun, is it was equally balanced between government and industry participation. So just on the government side.
And are the government people speaking for their offices?
They are. They are. And anybody in government who wants to participate in the survey can. And I'll talk about areas of alignment and non-alignment that we saw that I thought were really interesting in a moment. And then on the industry side, half of the respondents represented small businesses, a quarter medium size, and quarter the largest companies. So we truly got it, I thought, a very fair representation of different angles and perspectives between government and industry. So the survey goes out. We have organized our priority lines of effort around 5 priorities: budget stability and sufficiency, industrial readiness and increasing capacity, digital modernization, foreign military sales reform, and technology integration and cooperation with our allies and partners, and resilient supply chains. And so we got feedback from our divisions, from our member companies, from you all, about not just the questions, but what we thought the best responses to the questions were. And then we took the survey results, we took all the inputs that we got from ETI, the divisions, the chapters, our member companies, and our working groups, and we put together the report that has both the story, the narrative, but it also has the facts and data to back up the story and narrative.
So what would you say are the overall takeaways from all of that data input, from your analysis?
So I call challenges opportunities to excel. I always want to focus on what's positive, where can we be constructive. So let me start with what I think is really positive. One, because we had equal representation of government and industry responding to the survey, there is actual alignment and agreement on what the top challenges are. The budget process, the acquisition process, workforce challenges, and supply chains. And I'm also really proud of the work that we did to contribute to. I don't want to take credit for, but we absolutely contributed to the Department of Defense last year, putting out its inaugural National Defense Industrial Strategy,
right,
to start tackling those issues together with industry and taking more synergistic partnership. And it's so important. And their priority.
And we had Justin McFarland on
yes,
as a guest.
And he was excellent
to talk about
the
strategy.
If the listeners haven't heard that podcast with them, they need to immediately listen to that one next. And so the challenges and opportunities that this report, the Vital Signs 2024 report, illuminated mirror very closely with the strategy that the department put out. So I'm really optimistic that that we're going to tackle this, as Americans always do, on a bipartisan basis and together.
So the report does talk about these areas of alignment that you mentioned between government and industry. What are some of them, and how can we make use of the fact that there's alignment?
So I think first of all, when there's alignment, at least you're not fighting over the facts,
right?
And you're not fighting over priorities. I'll hedge a little bit and tell you that one of the areas of non-alignment is whether we have sufficient additional funding to tackle these challenges. But if you come back to prioritization and agreement on the challenges, and then you couple that with investment, which we can talk about a little bit, you're already halfway there. Some of these things too, I think there's agreement on a bipartisan basis, which is going to be so important, because it's going to take time, and it's going to take disciplined investment, and it's going to take a disciplined agreement across the party aisles and across both the executive branch and Congress to come together around those solutions. And the 2 areas I would highlight in particular is reinvesting in the talent pipelines of workforce. And we have spent so much time talking about growing STEM talent. I know you spend a lot of time on that. That is critical and crucially important. But we're also talking about reinvigorating the talent pipelines around skilled and touch labor. And so we have recommendations in there as ways to support. And then on resilient supply chains, the current administration has asked policymakers and industry to really talk about de-risking supply chains. Doing that in a sustainable way and the most cost-effective way is also going to take time and resources, and it's only going to happen if people agree on what the problem is, agree on what the solution is, and maintain discipline on the incremental steps to getting to that solution.
And on the workforce side, it's interesting to see there's a desire for a workforce that will end up being in the R&D part of the establishment.
Mm-hmm.
But like you're saying, there's also this need for skilled craftsmen, machinists, tradesmen, those kinds
Absolutely.
of things. And then there's a whole new part of the defense industry world, which is kind of more software-based, AI-based, cyber-based. I'm curious, their workforce needs, do they feel like they're being met, or is there a challenge there as well?
So we asked the largest companies for access to their chief human resource officers, who very graciously gave us access to their global workforce service that they put out. And they're in stiff competition for that talent.
So for the software talent, for
yes,
example. Okay.
Yes, all those categories you just mentioned, they're in stiff competition for. So one of the areas that we've illuminated is because the defense sector is so heavily regulated, because their customer is DoD, that we need to take a look about whether we need to update policies and regulations to make the defense sector more attractive to that type of talent, since we are in such stiff competition.
And on the supply chain side, you said that's an area of alignment, I think, understanding agreement. And the NDIS, I think, talks a lot about supply chains. Do you think there's any concern, a risk of that kind of alignment and collaboration when we think about these supply chain issues? Is there a downside to this?
So the biggest concern I see right now, and we talk about it in the report, is sometimes when you're so focused on agreement, you don't see underlying areas of vulnerability. And supply chains is a perfect example of that. So there is general agreement about the need to de-risk, but Arun, I would also share with you one of the surprises in the report, which is why we let the data speak for itself, is industry is concerned that we're not paying enough attention to be rebuilding the resiliency and sustainability of domestic supply chains. And a lot of those come back to the workforce shortages that we talked about. It comes back to inconsistent demand signals, so industry can't plan against it. But we have good data in the report talking about the reasons why domestic suppliers, sole and single source suppliers have left, both internationally and domestically. And we've tried to highlight those challenges.
And those could be deep in the supply chain, 2 or
Absolutely.
3 levels down, producing a particular part, delivering a particular service
Yes.
that you may not notice until you need it.
Yes, and the double-edged sword, and we talk about it in the report too, is the government needs and industry needs, from a fiduciary responsibility perspective, need visibility deep into the supply chain. But one of the things that we highlighted is you, one, absolutely need that, but 2, what are the policies you can proactively put in place so that industry knows what to do if you find non-conforming areas of the supply chain that need additional attention and resourcing?
So now that's an area of alignment,
Mm-hmm.
but you also mentioned there are areas where there isn't alignment between, I guess, government and industry views. What's an example of a couple of those?
So bear with me on this one, because part of it is the cognitive journey that I went on. I've read a lot of our ally and partner industrial strategies and their national strategies, because when we look at the future character of war, it's not going to be one region or one country that is fighting. It's going to be a true global coalition. So I wanted to understand how they're approaching things. The UK, I'll highlight them for a minute, absolutely highlight the need for a synergistic partnership and talk about the need for closer alignment between government and industry. And I want to unpack that a little bit for you, Arun, because what I found interesting was they went a step further and talked about needing to understand what drove behavior on both sides. And so watching the government say, I need to understand better why the private sector behavior is being driven the way it does. I need to understand how access to capital drives their behavior, really got us focused on the fact that that is an area from a policy perspective right now in Washington, that there is an alignment. And we talk about that in the report between the expectations government policymakers, both on the Hill and in the executive branch, have around business behaviors, around access to capital, how the defense sector compares to non-defense sectors in the United States, and then how our companies are being driven in their behavior by the fact that they're in competition for the capital with non-DoD sectors.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting in the report that there was this competition for capital amongst these companies, and they're competing against other companies who are in completely different sectors.
Yes.
So a person with a lot of money, billionaire, who chose not to have a 30-year career in the government maybe, or something like that, who has somewhere to invest their dollars, can choose to avoid the defense sector completely if it doesn't look like the return on investment meets what they are expecting. So how does that contrast with the traditional defense industry's expectations on return?
So first, let me just pull forward, because I agree with you, and it always comes back to, so what is this for me? What does this ultimately mean for the warfighter? And when you look at the access to capital and the regulation there, and then also pulling forward the IP concerns, I look at this as a policymaker still in my heart and say, does that mean that the U.S. warfighter is not getting the best technology available because we have created business disincentives to working with DoD?
Right.
So that worries me. And to the second part of your question, Arun, there have been a lot of policy conversations about things like stock buybacks and dividends, and whether traditional U.S. defense companies are being not just good stewards, but also good citizens. So one of the things that we highlighted in the report, and Riley, who I mentioned at the beginning, who did all the work on this, and I want her to get all the credit, she actually went through and put together a chart. I hope you all find it, but she compares R&D to get after the concerns about investment in independent research and development, capital expenditures, free cash flow, and operating margins. And what the data is showing is that the U.S. defense industry is acting consistent as it has over multiple decades, going back to the 1960s.
So that hasn't changed.
It has not changed. But the other thing that's startling is when you compare it to the non-defense sector, including high tech, and see what their margins are. They have higher operating margins, more free cash flow, and so they can do things that U.S. defense industry cannot do.
Right. And if we're in a world now where the amount of money that the public sector, that the government can spend on an emerging technology area like biotech or AI is going to be completely swamped by commercial money, by private money, by global money.
Right.
We have to rethink how the Department of Defense positions itself so that it can attract more of that money and not have to carry all of the costs on its own.
You know, the other thing people know, but they haven't really thought it through, and you and your team are thinking through the implications. So that's why I want to hover on this thread right now, is we also act as if it's still a situation where the government is the primary driver of technology innovation. Right. And we are not.
Right.
And our market share is ridiculously low, and it's not a US market, it's a global market. And the demands on those companies and what drives their behavior is not thinking of the warfighter first. It doesn't mean that they're not good citizens or that they don't care about the military, but they have different drivers on them that drive different behaviors than what DoD and the DoD enterprise is used to seeing.
So let's just play here for a second. That I don't think people in the Pentagon or in the policy circles, the think tank circles, disagree with what you said. What makes it difficult for the system to then change its behavior in any positive way?
I would tell you, when I look at having seen it from the building side and the hill side, that the rigidity of the system that forces outcomes that work within the rigidity of the system are not creating opportunities for policymakers to pursue different pathways. One of the things, and I'll give it free advertising because I think it's so critically important, is the work that you and David did as commissioners on the PPE Commission. And one of the areas that
another podcast episode that you should tell people to watch.
So we're setting you up for a series, and I can assure you no one has paid me to say any of this. But one of the things that really resonated with me is when you walked me through how you're approaching that conversation within the commission around software. And the fact that we were trying to stovepipe activities and colors of money with software that were completely irrelevant from both a business perspective and candidly from an operational perspective into a system that people knew how to work, rather than taking a look at saying, are we sacrificing the virtue of what we need to get to the warfighter on the altar of processes we know and understand?
Yeah, so this issue of the Department of Defense positioning itself to send the right demand signal and use its limited money in the right way, for example, this colors of money for software issue, it's a thing that comes out in the vital signs report. It comes out in most of the ETI reports, that if we can send the right demand signals, we will unleash all of that private capital, all of that commercial innovation, global innovation. And then it's up to us in the defense establishment to leverage that, channel it, and make use of it to deliver what we need to the operational forces. It's something I think that both your team and my team are going to be working on with our friends in the Pentagon and our members going forward.
So, Arun, if I can just quickly, before we move on, pull the thread on the demand signal, because that was a huge issue for our member companies. But as they're thinking about the future character war and what will be required, policymakers are really pushing them hard on what can you do to expand capacity. And that's forcing the conversation about what DoD can do to be a better government customer. And it's not just the budget issues that we've already covered or understanding the financial behavior of companies. It's also taking a look at how are the military services planning in the out years? Because right now they're saying, well, the budget is saying, ramp up this certain category of missions by X%. And the companies are saying, yes, and in 3 years you want to have a steep cliff of, we got up to, I'm making this up, 1,000 units for 3 years. And in the 4th year, you don't want any. So it's not just the capital expenditures involved in that, it's the moral issues of how do you manage a highly skilled and experienced workforce in that kind of environment.
Right, so you could put a big offering for a contract for a giant procurement in your eyes out there on the street, and you still may not get people to take you up on it and build whatever you're asking for because there is no sustained market there.
And it's also the supply chain issue. I need to be careful about this, but sitting through some conversations with our munitions producers, just as one tactical example, they are on a wait list of 3 years for access to a critical mineral that they need.
Right. And
they'll get it 3 years from now, but they have no ability to forecast if they'll need more based on what the current budget documents are saying.
Right. One of the areas that you focused on in the report, and I know your own work with your team focuses on a lot, is small businesses, who are the majority of NDIA members are small businesses. So what specific areas of concern or strength did you find in the vital signs work related to small businesses?
So there's a couple things I want to highlight. They absolutely have some of the same challenges that companies of all sizes do. And they'd be the first to say, we are a business and our business behaviors are the same. But they also do have unique challenges. One of the areas that I think would surprise people is they continue to state one of their largest challenges is they don't have enough institutional support. And they don't want that translated into set up another small business office that can help mentor me of how to set up a business. They're looking for practical things like, we need help getting access to contact information for the contracting officers. We need to actually get in touch with the people who have contracts. We have DoD, I won't get into all the acronyms, but DoD has workflow systems where you actually physically get paid. And their point is those systems aren't working correctly, and the people that are assigned to run them tend to be military personnel that get rotated in and out and don't actually get trained on how to use them. So maybe you should have dedicated workforce that know how to work that system and know what the unique challenges of small businesses who are just simply trying to get paid. I mean, it's basic blocking and tackling things that they're looking for.
And are you finding that those kinds of concerns are coming from all different types of small business? Because a small business is not a small business. It's
Sure.
not small. There are the new small coding AI biotech companies. There are the suppliers of that important widget that goes into the radar system that if that company didn't exist, we didn't have a radar.
Yes.
Right? There are direct contractors who are serving as primes in lots of different fields. And are you seeing different issues across them, or how
Yes.
does that
So
work?
let me walk through the mechanics of that piece and then pull forward some things that would be interesting for some of those categories of small business companies we include in the report. So we have a small business division that is completely organized and structured to support our small business membership, which is the majority of NDI's membership. And they represent companies across all the sectors you just mentioned. So I asked their policy and legislative committee to source for me what their key challenges and priorities are. And these are the things that came forward. But other things that have come up this year that we do include in the report that I want to make a plug for is the importance of sending the signal that we need to reauthorize SBIR and STTR when it comes up next year.
Small Business Innovation Research Program.
Correct.
Right.
And the other thing that's actually been a huge issue for small businesses that larger companies felt before now, but they're now feeling, is the tax R&D amortization issue, where they can no longer expense over in 1 year and have to expense over 5. That has created huge cash flow challenges, historically high. That's statistically valid. It's historically high inflation rates. And so you add that on top of their other cash flow challenges, and they're really feeling the crunch.
So, as we sort of come in for a landing here, the challenges that you saw here and the strengths that you saw here, they then get turned into some recommendations at the end. Some of them sound very legislative in nature,
Yes.
right? To fix the tax code or reauthorize the permanently authorized SBIR program. Give us a rundown of some of the recommendations and the style of those recommendations.
So it's everything from near-term tactical, you either did it or you did not. And the examples you just mentioned, I put in the near-term tactical, you either did or you did not. Some of them are going to take longer work. One of the areas we haven't highlighted but would be important to a lot of the companies and the community of stakeholders around ETI is around the area of foreign military sales and technology integration and cooperation. We have a Cold War era framework that worked when government controlled all the technology. It is not working in the current environment. And so I talk about the administration have I give them all the credit, very clever offense strategies such as AUKUS, the Australia, UK, US trilateral partnership around not just nuclear powered, not nuclear armed, but nuclear powered submarines. And then Pillar 2 that works on technology cooperation on key technologies we expect in the future character war, but also defensive strategies that are more focused on de-risking. But all of those strategies are fundamentally pinned to a Cold War era framework that doesn't work in today's environment. So we have critical recommendations around that. Some of the areas around workforce and supply chain, as I mentioned at the beginning, Arun, you and I both know the only way some of these big bet issues get tackled is on a bipartisan basis with a sustained discipline commitment of every year we're going to chip away at this until we solve the problem.
But not everything requires a law change.
It does not,
and so some of the recommendations are law changes, but some of them are regulatory changes, some of them are just practice, cultural changes, and then funding as well. So
let's pull forward the funding because that's a perfect example. I came from the Hill. My heart will always probably be on the Hill, and I have the utmost respect for the men and women who raise their hand to serve as members of Congress or staff. But one of the things I did not know or think through the full implications of when I was on the Hill is budget instability and the downstream impacts. The biggest shame I felt when I was on the Hill was during the government shutdown. You felt like I failed the American people. So anytime you avoided a shutdown and you had CR, you're like, I did my job today.
So these CRs, continuing resolutions, you really do highlight the impact that it has on industry, big and small.
It does. And that's an area where, workers lose their jobs. The cost of rehiring them, if you can get them back, goes up every time you do that. So it creates this vicious circular pattern that ultimately, it just makes everything more expensive for the Department of Defense. So you have a very practical issue and then a moral issue. But this is something that's completely within the agency of Congress to fix on its own, of getting back to regular order, passing on time, full year appropriations bills.
Working with the executive branch.
And working with the executive branch.
Right. So we're completely running out of time. With our remaining time, I want to say if member companies outside people interested in what you are talking about today, the problems that you're talking about today, what should they do? How can they work with you?
So we are in the process of relaunching a more modern NDI membership so that we can truly capture the entire defense ecosystem. The NDIA.org website has all the information on it. You can talk to the membership team, you can talk to our team, but I would tell you, if you're working with Defense Department, if you're focused on getting the best equipment, the best services, the best platforms, the best support to the U.S. warfighter, and you want to do that, we want to find a way to help you work to achieve your goals.
Well, that's great. Thanks to our guest, Jen Stewart, for this informative discussion. Thank you for all of your service over all these years, and thank you for being my colleague now at NDIA. With that, I want to take this opportunity to highlight a few of ETI's upcoming events. Most importantly, August 7th through 9th is our second NDIA Emerging Technologies Conference. You can register for the event at www.ndiatechexpo.org. We've got a great lineup of keynotes ranging from Deputy Secretary Kath Hicks to Undersecretary Heidi Shue, Undersecretary Bill LaPlante, all three service undersecretaries, EUCOM and AFRICOM will be there, as well as CDAO and all of the science and technology offices. It's also a great opportunity for NDIA member companies and universities and small businesses to present their new technologies and new initiatives to the government. We're also continuing our ongoing monthly Tech 101 series, as well as our drumbeat of webinars and reports. Please look for these. You can register for these and other ETI events. Please visit our website, emergingtechnologiesinstitute.org, or the NDIA website, ndia.org/events. Additionally, be sure to visit our website to see our past reports. For example, we touched on supply chain issues a lot in 2 reports on directed energy and hypersonic supply chains. So thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode. If you enjoyed this podcast, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel to stay up to date with all of our latest content. You can email us at eti@ndia.org with questions, comments, or ideas for future podcast topics. I think Jen came up with 3 or 4 just in this conversation. Special thanks to Daniel Park and Melanie Yu for producing the podcast. Thanks again to Jen for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
See you on next episode of Emerging Tech Horizons.